Welcome back to Andersen Acres. Today we're talking about something that's fun and rewarding and, if you're into it, delicious. We're diving into the world of raising goats for meat. Whether you're running a full-scale homestead or just curious about adding a few goats to your backyard operations, stick around because we're going to cover a little bit of everything today. We're going to talk about breed selection, why these animals are sometimes called mortgage lifters, because they are. You might not have heard the term, but a lot of people call them mortgage lifters. So let's get into it. Let's start with the very basics. Why would anyone want to raise goats for meat in the first place? Well, first of all, goat meat, also, sometimes it's called chivan or cabrito, is in high demand. It's lean, nutrient-dense, and enjoyed by cultures around the world. In fact, goat meat is one of the most widely consumed red meats globally, even though it's still kind of a specialty item in a lot of North America. And she's going to get up. I'm going to have to move the camera. Are you going to get up? Yeah? Well, come on then. Come on through. Come on. Well, she decides if she's going to come through the fence or not. Let's talk about the demand for goat meat, because even in North America, that demand is slowly growing. More people are looking for healthier alternatives to beef and pork, especially ones that are lower in saturated fat. Goat fits that bill. Not everybody wants to eat goat, and you certainly do not have to. I do not, because I have alpha gal and can't eat mammals, but it is absolutely an option. And before you go, oh no, I could never eat goat. Do you eat lamb? Have you ever had a rack of lamb? Because you know what? It's not that different. The taste is different, but from a perspective of which of these animals are we going to eat, it's not really all that different. Okay? It's just not. So from that perspective, it's not really different at all. Just adjusting the camera there a little bit. So, with growing multicultural populations and the rise of specialty diets, more consumers are seeking out goat meat, especially for religious or cultural holidays. That means an opportunity for small farmers. Okay? That means you do indeed have an opportunity. And forgive the muck. It's muck. It's muck season. It's muck season for everyone. My camera was sinking in the mud. Hi, Shadowfax. You could go around the mud. Anyway, you might have heard the term mortgage lifters, you might not have. But this is typically talking about goats. Meat goats especially. It's kind of a legendary phrase in the farming community, at least among people who raise goats for meat, and here's why. Goats reproduce quickly, they require less space than cattle, and the cost to raise them is pretty low relative to other animals. They're not free, but they're cheaper to raise than pigs or cattle. They're not cheaper to raise than chickens, but I'm assuming that if you're exploring the idea of raising goats for meat, you want more than just chicken. Okay, that's what I'm assuming here. So the return can be significant. Okay, so the return on raising goats for meat, depending on your area and possible demand, the return could be almost the same as the return for raising a pig. And they have lower output, they're an easier animal to handle, and all that jazz. So, they don't need the same amount of space as cattle, that's for sure. She's going around. I am probably going to have to follow her because she's going all the way around. In fact, maybe I won't follow her. She's going to go around and go into the barn, I think. So we'll just film her for a second, and then we'll switch over to images and stuff of meat goats, because she's technically a meat goat breed. Fainting goats are, if they're not raised as cannon fodder, are traditionally raised as meat goats. So, yeah, we are not eating her. Every time I mention that fainting goats can be used as meat goats, somebody goes, are you going to eat Arwen? And the answer is no. I'm not eating Arwen. She's our pet. But that doesn't change the fact that her breed can be used for that. So, back to meat goats and raising them. So, a good breeding pair of meat goats can produce twins or even triplets every year. You can sell the kids for, like, depending on your area, you might be selling kids for $100. You might be selling them for $200, $300. Around here, for a newborn kid, you're looking at $250 for a boy, and little girls, little does, you're looking at $300, $350, and that's just average. So really, specialty breeds will go higher, and obviously cheap grade goats might go a little cheaper. So it's not bad money for selling the babies. You could be looking at a few $100s per goat per year if they have twins or triplets. It could be pretty good. That kind of return can genuinely help you pay your mortgage. That's why they're called mortgage lifters. For relatively little input, they can net you some decent money. Now, not all goats are created equal, especially when we're talking meat production. So, a few of the top breeds that you might want to consider raising for meat, first of all, Boer. Look into Boer goats. These are originally from South Africa, and these guys are the gold standard of meat goats. They're big, fast growing, and have a pretty calm temperament, so they're not bad to have around your family, like your kids and stuff. They're not bad for that. You might want to go with Kikos. These would be my choice if I were raising meat goat. I like the Kiko. They're from New Zealand. They're hardy, parasite resistant, and excellent for pasture-based systems. Spanish goats are cool, right? Spanish goats are cool. They're fun, but they are more feral by nature. They are super tough and adaptable. They're great for rugged terrain, but they're not super great for families like little kids. So if you have little kids, I might do like Kiko or Boer. I wouldn't necessarily go with the Spanish goat. Then you have Savannas. Savannah goats are kind of cousins of the Boer, except they're all white. They have great growth rates, and they're pretty good for heat resistance. So if you live in a hot, humid climate, you might want to think about Savannah goats. Of course, there are plenty of successful crosses and mixed breed herds too. So don't feel like you need to break the bank on purebreds just to get started. Now, remember that no matter what kind of goat you're raising, they do need shelter from the wind, rain, and extreme temperatures. But goats aren't picky, okay? A simple three-sided shed and a dry place to lie down is really all they need, okay? Nice deep bedding in the winter so they don't get cold, and you're fine. Even in extreme temps. We get 40 below where we are, goats are fine. They just need to be able to get out of the wind, stay dry, and have some nice cozy bedding. As for feeding them, goats are browsers. So if you live in an area like we do, like look at all this brush we have, this is actually really good for goats. Sheep are grazers. They'll eat the grass. That's snow, but they'll eat the grass. Goats will eat the brush. So they love woody plants, shrubs, and brush. That makes them perfect for clearing overgrown land while feeding themselves in the process. Of course, you're going to supplement with hay in the winter, which does add to your cost, and maybe a little bit of grain for either, your growing babies or your lactating mamas. All of this happens. That will eat into your cost a little bit, but not as bad as it does with like cattle, right? So all in all, they're a good investment. And then breeding your meat goats. Well, most meat goats go into heat seasonally, so they'll come into heat in late summer or early fall. And then about 150 days later, bang, babies. Generally, the pregnancy of meat goats is pretty uncomplicated, mostly because meat goats are bred to be hardy, right? They're hardy creatures, so they tend to be uncomplicated. The births tend to be uncomplicated. Meat goat producers usually wean between 8 and 12 weeks, so they don't need mama anymore. You don't want to be bottle feeding. That'll cut into your profit and your time. Let them be with mama if you can. And then once they're 8 to 12 weeks, if you're interested in raising them as meat goats, they're ready to start growing out for market or for your own personal use. And that's where things get interesting. And you do need to be aware of your local rules here. Because depending on where you are, you might not be able to sell a processed meat goat, meaning you have slaughtered and processed the goat and it is ready to consume yourself. So where I am, you can't do that. You have to have them processed in an inspected facility. The good thing is we have inspected facilities you can take your own animals to. So if you don't want to do the slaughtering and processing yourself, you do not have to here. And you don't really have to anywhere. You can probably find a place that will do it for you. So we have that. But what about if you want to sell the meat goats for someone else to process? So you don't want to sell processed meat goats. That's what most people do, actually. Typically, what they'll do is they'll decide to sell at a livestock auction, direct to consumers, or, of course, keep a few for yourself to process later. There are a few ways to sell your meat goats. You can do local livestock auctions. That's not my favorite way. And this is fast and easy, but prices can fluctuate. You can sell directly to ethnic markets or individual buyers. This is especially popular around Christmas or Passover or times when goat might be on the menu. You can also work again with an inspected butcher and sell your goats either to the butcher and then they'll resell the meat once they're done processing, or you can have them process and then buy the meat back, basically. So you pay them to do it. There are a lot of choices here. You could, depending on local regulations again, you might be able to sell cuts of goat meat at farmers markets or local stores. These are all different ways to make your goats pay for themselves. If you're into meat goats, again, we are not eating Arwen, I promise. We don't raise meat goats here at Andersen Acres. Somebody always goes, "You're not processing her for meat, are you?" The answer is no! We won't do that, I promise. So moving on. Why should you, a hobby farmer, homesteader, or small farmer, consider meat goats? Well, one, they're low maintenance. They're really, really easy to care for. Okay? Goats are simple. You bring them home, you make sure they have food and water and a place to get out of the rain. They're happy as little clams. They clear land. So again, in the brush, Arwen especially, she's really good in the brush. She gets in there. She eats the undergrowth and stuff like that. Really good for if you have really woodsy areas like us. The other benefit of goats is they reproduce quickly and they have a solid return on their investment. And let's not forget how fun goats are. Baby goats, whether you are raising them for meat, for pets, for milk, for breeding, or even for their fiber, are adorable. They're sweet. They're perfect. We love them. So they're just plain fun. They're smart, curious, and have huge personalities. Raising meat goats can be a great way to connect with your land, your animals, and your community while making a bit of income along the way. Now that really is about it for us here today at Andersen Acres. Drop a comment below if you're thinking about getting into meat goats or if you've got a favorite breed you're raising right now. I'd love to hear from you. We'll see you tomorrow.